Are you rethinking in reform your coziness, chumminess
No.
to
At the end of the day, people vote in the UK for British domestic policies, and that's why we're leading in the polls. And look what happens in Canada. I mean, it's interesting how those polls have gone up and down. That's their business. I'm not going to interfere. But the reality is, here in the UK, what we're hearing on the doorsteps, it's all about illegal and legal immigration. That is what is infuriating the British people, and that's why we're leading in the polls.
Let me just show you this picture. This was from 2016, I grant you. There is Nigel Farage. Do you think you'd be advising him not to have a similar photo in any elections coming up here?
Look, at the end of the day, we're focusing on domestic issues. We've got a crisis in this country of immigration. We've got a crisis of immigration.
Richard really doesn't want to talk about this, does he?
We've got a crisis about, we've got no economic growth, and we've got net stupid zero that is destroying industries,
but you obviously
destroying
thought
jobs.
at one point that actually that association, that close relationship and friendship...
Anybody's entitled to friendships with people. Donald Trump is the elected president of the US with the biggest, I think, ever number of people who voted for him. And whether or not people like the way he goes about things, let's wait in a few months whether or not we've got peace in Ukraine, whether or not we've got peace in the Middle East. Who knows?
All right.
That's the reality.
What's wrong with it?
It's clearly a bad thing for the world that Donald Trump is the president of the United States. It's clearly a bad thing for the UK that Donald Trump is the president of the United States.
Nonsense.
And it's clearly a bad thing for reform.
Why are we leading in the polls then, Ellie? We're leading in the polls, so clearly our domestic policies are appealing to the British.
I'll let you finish your sentence. You're clearly trying to distract attention from the fact that Nigel Farage is so closely associated with Donald Trump, because you know it is electoral poison in the UK.
Before I say anything else, it's not true that Donald Trump won more votes in the 2024 election than anybody else ever standing to be as president. Joe Biden got more votes 4 years earlier. Joe Biden got 80 million plus. I think Trump got 77 million last year. Just a matter of fact. Although, of course, I'm sure some people watching or listening who are particularly favourable to Trump and maybe even reform would say, well, those votes weren't legitimate. Helena, I find this a really interesting conversation, actually, because it's not just reform here in the UK that are thinking about distancing themselves from Trump. There's a whole subsection now of the European radical right, which is to the right of legacy centre-right politics on the continent. I'm thinking the AfD, I'm thinking, Rassemblement National, I'm thinking Maloney. They've all very much cheered on the Trump project. Some of them even have connections with Trump via people like Steve Bannon. But it does feel that Trump, when it comes to the UK, when it comes to Germany, France, Italy, etc., Musk as well, these guys could actually be a net negative for those parties, even if right now in 2025, they're very much on the up.
And that's the thing, I think that some of these parties can get away with distancing themselves from Trump. I don't think Reform UK have that luxury because they're so totally in alignment on so many issues. Of course, when it comes to migration, a lot of these right-wing parties broadly, and even left-wing parties like the Social Democrats in Denmark, they've adopted pretty kind of hardline stances on migration, and they don't seem to have that connection to the Trump administration. But Nigel Farage is somebody who stands next to Donald Trump. The infinite pictures of him. He continues to go to Mar-a-Lago. He was watching the inauguration, but not actually properly in the congregation at the inauguration. But regardless, he spends more time in the United States than he does in Clacton. This is something that is really difficult for them to be able to separate in a way that a bunch of the radical right parties in Europe can't do. Another thing that's also different between these right-wing parties in Europe and Nigel Farage in the UK with Reform UK is that economically, people like Nigel Farage, they just kind of, when it comes to things like tax cuts and broader macro policy, in terms of trade policy, obviously there's a difference. Nigel Farage is pro-free trade. Donald Trump is clearly a protectionist. But when it comes to macro policy in terms of tax cuts, industrial subsidy, all these kind of things, the Trump administration and Reform UK broadly are in alignment. They want tax cuts for the super rich. They want tax cuts for small businesses as well, although the majority of tax cuts are focused at the super rich. And they want to market themselves as being the tax cutters and people who are there for free market capitalism. They're fighting for capitalism more broadly. When a lot of the right-wing parties in Europe, they're much more syncretic in their economics, and that makes them much more popular. You'll notice some of the people who've actually been really popular in terms of almost getting into government, people like Rassemblement National under Marine Le Pen, much more left-wing on the economy than potentially even Emmanuel Macron is, in a lot of ways, definitely more than Les Républicains. they have had loads of success amongst people who just kind of moved away from a bunch of centre-left parties over things like migration and integration. The same is true of the Sweden Democrats. Jimmy Ekeson's party are in coalition government in Sweden at the moment, and they've always supported welfare state and Labour policy and interventionist government. Reform UK don't do this. There's no base for this in the UK, and they're far more aligned with Trumpian economics. And when it comes to geopolitics, they're lockstep in line with the United States, insofar as one of the whole points of Brexit was to take us closer to the United States. It was to extricate ourselves from the economic and geopolitical bloc that was Europe, diplomatically and economically, and move us closer to the United States. When it comes to geopolitics, people like Farage and Trump, as far as I can see, they want us to become a vassal state of the United States. They want us to literally have all of our policy geopolitically dictated by them because they already agree with a lot of those kind of positions that the Trump administration and previous Republican administrations have taken on things like geopolitics. And again, very little base for that in the UK either. So even if they try to distance themselves kind of personally from Trump and stop talking about his government, they would still be tarred with a lot of that same brush due to them agreeing ideologically on so much. And I think that's also going to be difficult for them to shake off too. And it will be electoral poison, or maybe not electoral poison in that would stop them getting elected potentially, because I know that the Tories and Labour also pretty pro-Trump in a lot of ways as well. But there is a ceiling. There's an electoral ceiling for Reform UK that they will not be able to vault if they continue down the same kind of ideological path, this kind of Thatcherite path, and this kind of right-wing geopolitical path that they want to do so, which is subsumed by Trumpian politics.
Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for memberships. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.